You are in room South Seas GH for session exploiting XXE in file upload functionality with Will Van Die Ver.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. I know it's early. So this is exploiting XXE and file upload functionality. And the basic overview for the presentation, I'm talking about inserting XML entities, external XML entities, into different files, uploading them into a web app to essentially exploit the vulnerability, primarily focused on OXML or Office documents. So introduce OXML, talk about the format a bit, introduce XML entities in the context of that, and then take a little further exploitation from there. So I created a GitHub page. It doesn't have anything on it right now, but tonight it'll have the slides, some references, also like my notes from the demos, and then code. So I have a tool that I'm introducing that's helped me a lot in terms of the testing process. So to introduce Office Open XML or OXML, it's what we all think about when we think of Office documents. So it's docx, PBTX, XSLX, spreadsheet, PowerPoint, Word. It's an open file format developed by Microsoft. It sort of came on the heels of the antitrust suit. It's open in the sense that the specification for the file format is open. So there's an ISO standard for it. It's broken up into 4 parts. They're pretty extensive. Like part 1 is 5,000 pages long. It's basically like an encyclopedia of the format itself. And the goal from having it open was to create interoperability, right? Before this, it was doc, it was .rtf. So by making it open, the hope was to have other people developing software to open it up and allow people to, to analyze or use these the documents. Available for Office 2003, then became default in Office 2007, and now it's pretty much the standard for the most part. The format itself basically is just a zip archive containing XML and with media files inside of it. So this is actually an image from the 2007 introduction on the Microsoft site. You can find it, it'll be in the references. But in blue would be your zip archive, and then everything else would be inside. And I usually break it up into 3 parts. One would be the document properties at the top there. And that basically assigns an ID to any file within the archive itself. So you're not like carrying around files into the different parts. It's just an ID pointing. On the right, you have the images, video, sound files. So if you had a PowerPoint presentation, this would be your pictures stored in your PowerPoint. And then on the bottom left, the other probably most important part is Word ML, Spreadsheet ML. This is actually the content that you're seeing up on the page there. And the ML is for the markup language and the way that it's formed. In terms of the general parsing order, like let's say you want to write an application and you wanted to parse Word documents. Microsoft recommends you would parse it in this order. First, you would parse the relationships file, which is an XML file, and that assigns the ID to any file within the document. Next, you would likely parse the content types.xml, which is essentially a MIME type listing. It says, if you have an image inside, this is an image/PNG file. Or, excuse me, if it's a PNG inside, it's an image/PNG or namespace in XML. And then you probably, depending on what you want your app to do, you take apart the default main document part. So for Word, this is going to be /word/document.xml, and that's the main content of the document itself. I should mention for the first part too, there can be multiple relationship files, so there are different opportunities in there. Let's say you're going to be testing a web app, and the web app allows you to upload a Word document into it. You want to test doing an XML entity attack inside of the web app, or inside of the Word as you upload it into the web app. You take your Word document, you would this could be one process. You take the Word document, you would unzip it, so now you can see all the files inside. I don't know if you can see in the image, but there's content types.xml and the relationships files, so the files we just talked about. You'd put the XML entity into one of these files. You probably want to target one of the files that are parsed first, so say relationships or content types.xml. You zip it back up. Essentially, you have a valid Word document at this point. It won't open in Office because Office doesn't respect doc type or DTD, but it's technically, by the specification, a valid Word document. So you take that, you upload it into your web app. On the web app side, it's going to unzip the file and execute your whatever you've done for your external XML entity. And you profit, right? And then you're making money. So I had a bug bounty on Slack.com, and for the very similar situation. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with Slack. You have these groups that you're with. It's for collaboration, more or less, like an IRC on steroids kind of thing. And so one of the things you can do is you can share files. Either you can upload files for yourself, or you can upload files to share with other people. By putting an external XML entity into, I started with content types.xml, but you can also do the relationships file. It's actually probably more preferable to do the relationships file. Put the external entity into there, zip it back up, upload it into the site, and it connected back. Similar one, different bounty hunter, is that what they're called? He found one on Facebook. So Facebook's career site allowed you to upload your resume. It was a third-party site they'd set up, so you could upload your resume, but if it had an external XML entity inside of it, connect it back, and then you could do all the nasty things associated with that. So you can read files in the file system, do SSRF, make outbound connections. For him, it paid pretty well. So this is well documented online. The link is in the references. But he got $6,500 for it, so that's pretty good for that effort. So I think anybody who's done this attack before knows that it gets annoying fast. Like, you have a lot of documents you're working with, like trying to edit inside of the XML. So one of the things I tried to do was to automate the process, at least for me, a little bit. So I wrote a tool, and the original version is out there now, but the updated one will be out there tonight. It has a lot more features that I'm showing off. So let's go over to it. That is not a command. All right, so usually the first thing I'll do is I'll set up just the Python HTTP listener. Because the external entities I'll be using connect back out, and so it's like a really easy test to know that it's working, as I'm sure many people also do. So there's two modes to the tool. One is a build mode, which basically just means that we're going to be building the Word document. You can give it any file you want. So sometimes when I'm doing testing for this, it'll require a specific type of file. A different bug bounty ad, it required a spreadsheet with a specific column it was looking for. So I wanted to backdoor that file. There's also some sample files in here if you just want to test it out without using a specific file. So specify build mode, specify the file, and then it allows you from there to just choose the type of attack you want to do. So I'm going to do a remote DTD. So I guess, are most people familiar with a public remote DTD, Jack? It basically allows, the nice thing about a public remote DTD is that even if external entities are disabled, it still might trigger. So we'll choose that. We're going to connect back to IP I have set up. It doesn't really matter, the file. In this case, it's just going to look for it on the server. So the next thing it does, it opens up the document in case you want to target a specific file. So I'm going to choose the relationships file because that's the first one that's parsed. It'll insert the entity into that file and create a valid Word document. So now we have this valid Word document here that we can actually test out in an application. So I have an older version of XO platform here. Hopefully this doesn't break. Sweet. So we upload our file, the file's uploaded, and we see that we have a connect back. So we know that external entities are, well, in this case, public DTD is actually allowed and external DTD is allowed. So from there, you'd begin to do the nasty stuff that you want to do from this attack. All right. In the case where, let's say that failed, usually I'll take a step back and actually just, I think like most people, and just try and get an XML entity in there. So the first place I'll usually put it is actually into the main document part. So opening up, say, Word document.xml, putting the entity into the top of that, and then uploading the file to see if that string is then present in there. That's also in the tool in the case that you just want to do the basic test. There's no security implication to allowing the entity. But it is nice in the case where we'll talk about later, like for instance, if you're doing cross-site scripting testing on like a large scale, having an entity can actually be pretty handy. Next one, recursive XML entities. So again, I don't usually test for this because it's a DOS condition. The idea being that you create it's billion laughs attack. You create a very large recursion with your entities, and then it consumes the memory. The application crashes. But I did take a look at some of the libraries that parse these files. So if you were going to parse a Word document or parse a PowerPoint, you might use one of these up here. They're pretty common. So Apache POI and docx4j are both in Java. OpenXML SDK is .NET, and then Nokogiri would be if you were doing Ruby. I won't go into the CVEs, but there are a couple interesting things from here. One, if you're going to do the patching process, you're probably doing it in possibly two places. One could be the library explicitly disabling it, and the other might be that say the JDK or the JVM is actually depending on it being disabled. Other interesting thing being that this is pretty late. Like 2014 is pretty late to actually have this patch in here. And I think as a betting man, if I'm going to attack an application, I'm probably going after Java. It was mostly the latest patch in the game. Public DTDs still typically work. And I believe Java 8 was the first one to actually have it disabled by default, though there is Java 7 versions with entities disabled by default. OpenXML SDK, as far as I could find, was patched pretty early, but it also supports a lot of the features that may not be found in the other libraries, so it can be interesting too. In terms of other features for the tool, one I added in cross-site scripting testing, imagining that if you're uploading a document and the strings are going to be presented from the document, that it might be nice to use either XML entities or to actually just have it inside the document itself. Again, if you were to write like a script tag in Office, that would get parsed down, right? It would become like &GT rather than actually having the script tag in. So by having it in the XML, we're sort of skirting the process a little bit. Oops. Actually. So here would be an example one that I'm going to replace. I would have these symbols in it. I just call it the burp suite symbol. Not sure of the actual name here, but if I can see that. So putting this symbol throughout the document. The nice thing about doing it this way is that, for instance, the header, the comments are in different files. So when we have this symbol in here and we replace it, it goes through the process of going into each XML file and actually placing the entity into it, rather than going through each one by hand. So I would usually keep like a complicated file like this. It has comments, headers, it has a drawing ML, the shape here. And so it provides the opportunity to try and attack it, some different points. All right. So taking that file, again, we choose our entity. In this case, I'm just going to do C data bad cars. So this is actually putting the bad characters we're using into C data field. And then it's just gone through the whole process of replacing it in all of the different locations. So now we can upload into an app and check that we could possibly, maybe even at the smallest case, we might be able to get an error out of it. That's what I found. Like, even if I can't get cross-site scripting in there, at least I can get an error that I can glean more information out of it. Also added in what I was calling a fuzzed version. So let's say you have a file with your cross-site scripting strings that you always like to check for. You don't want to type them by hand, or you don't want to use the one I have in here. Then the fuzz one will basically create a file for each one of the ones you have. So it's a file. It'll have your script tag on one line, and it's 40 lines long with all of your different attack vectors. So we do fuzz C data. In this case, I have 77 checks I'm usually doing, so it's inserting them into the file in all of the different places. Just kind of useful, right? I mean, these are things I was running into to try to make it a little bit easier. Now there's LFI checks. So this is actually from a relationship file. You'll notice the relationship ID, the type of the file, and then specifying as URI the target, which is in the zip file itself. So fuzzing inside of there, just trying to at least cause an error. By the specification, it shouldn't allow you to actually break out of that, but the libraries all handle it differently. I think that's probably what the interesting is. When I was playing with the libraries, they all handle it in a different manner. Some would error out, some would handle it gracefully, so it's just at least worth checking for. Other file formats also added in SVG and then LibreOffice or OpenOffice. OpenOffice it's basically the same process. The only difference is the files inside of it. So let's say the main content file is not called /word document.xml, it's called, I think, content.xml. Other interesting thing about LibreOffice is it supports SVG. Office doesn't support SVG. Though by the specification, you could put in an XML file. It's called a custom XML file. So, and that could actually be an SVG. And actually in the specification, they use an SVG as their example. Some interesting features of OXML that I've been kind of playing with. I've been hoping to find someplace that would work. This was sort of buried in there, but H-link hover. So you can set a hypertext link to go fetch something as soon as the mouse goes over it in all parts of Word. It says it can be in the drawing ML. In terms of what's interesting about this for, like, say, Office, is you can also have it run a program remotely. So like I have this Game of War, hopefully this demo is breaking this morning, hopefully it goes okay. But this Game of War file, it has a hyperlink over it. When you run your mouse over it, it actually goes and fetches an executable remotely and then runs it locally. So let's see this. So there we go. It uses SMB to do that. So if you run that, yeah, it's breaking. So you can see the SMB being fetched. So this is Impacket. If people use Impacket, great tool. So you can see it fetching the EXE and running it locally. So that would be another thing where, I mean, I don't think the EXE attack is going to work in the web app, but you can set it to almost like a click-jacking attack. As you upload it, if somebody runs their mouse over it, it goes and fetches the link for you automatically. Next would be XSLT transform. So I have it, put this back into view mode here. So this is in the specification. I haven't seen a library use it, but it's really interesting. What it says in the specification is, if you have this value in your markup, and you press Save As to an XML, it will go and fetch a remote XSLT for you, parse it, and run it. So the idea would be you would stuff this inside of your Word document, upload into a web app, and then you do a Save As. And if it follows it, then what it should do is it would actually go fetch your XSLT and run it for you, which would open up a whole other attack vector if the library supports it. Embedded documents is another one that's throughout there. So you can have a Word document with a spreadsheet inside of it. And so you could actually have your attack vector in there. I think the better example might be like OpenOffice, where you can have an SVG in there. So you could actually have your attack inside your SVG. So as the SVG is parsed in the OpenOffice document, then your attack would occur. Finally, SSRF. So I think there's probably a lot of SSRF opportunities. One thing you can put into, for instance, one thing you put in a Word document is you can put a remote file in there and have it set to go update as it's used. So as you open the Word document every time, it'll go and fetch an image. This would be a similar example or a similar attack you might use in a web app. Another one would be like an external connection in an Excel spreadsheet. So you imagine a pivot table that has a database connection that's updated every time. These are all opportunities to require the library to go and do something for you. So testing cheat sheet in terms of just the process. So the classic XXE and OXML, I think this is the popular one that's sort of out there now. It's effective. I usually use, like I said, I use a public DTD to first start with to see if it works, and then move on to the more complex attack vectors. Canary testing, so this would be, is an entity allowed? So for instance, as I said in Office, a doc type isn't allowed, or DTD isn't allowed, so I'll usually use that to see, can I even get that canary in there? Can I get that the XML entity in there? Again, the cross-site scripting testing, usually in 3 different categories. One is that CData attack I was talking about. Then using plain. No XML parser should allow you to have the script tag, but I mean, it's worth testing. And the third would be attributes. So using the example of the comments, there are fields in the comments that are in the XML that you can't edit. So like an author field. The author field you can't edit through the UI, but if you go into the comments.xml file, actually playing around in there, I have seen comments presented in a UI. LFI, and this is probably going to be in a relationships ID or anything that's going to allow a URI. I mean, it could possibly be in what's called an external target, which is the example from SSRF. So if you just look up external target in the specifications, it's a remotely fetchable value. So you could possibly also have an LFI through there. Embedded XXE attacks, the SSRF, and then the save as document conversion. So this was like the XSLT transform attack. Summary points. So when I originally submitted the CFP, I just found this string of finding this in bounties, like in products, and so I was kind of thinking about like, why are we seeing this on like a Facebook or a Slack sort of, well, I'll call it so late in the game? And I think it's because the libraries are getting the research a little more. The libraries that parse the XML on one part of the site may not be the same ones that parse the uploaded files. So it might be, so the developers might say, oh, hey, yeah, we've definitely patched for this, but it turns out the ones that are parsing the uploaded the uploaded Word document are not the same libraries. And even the dependencies into that. So docx4j actually has it's fixed in the code, but it ships with a vulnerable version of Apache Batic, which handles SVG files. So that's sort of where the embedded documents thing could come into play. Patches exist, obviously. Many are very recent, so, and by the recent ones, I mean the default settings. On offense, lots of surface area for exploitation, lots of areas to attack. And then also tons of untouched research targets. So I was trying to think about just all of the applications in the enterprise, even just applications written in Java that handle a Word document. And some of the ones that were coming to mind, like a spam filter, like any sort of DLP solution is opening all your files. I started targeting collaboration environments because they love looking into people's files. So uploading into those and seeing where it goes. And then also, say, any sort of like instant messaging where you're sharing things, where it ends up on a cloud-based server, we'll say. So I know I sort of flew through that. Are there any questions? And the slides should be up there. Any questions from anybody? Wow. All right.